So it is official. Daniel Bryan's WWE contract has officially expired. Now, this is really interesting, of course, and I know we've done a few videos talking about Daniel Bryan here on the channel over the course of the last few days, ever really since SmackDown on Friday, but it's a massive, massive story, and it's exploding to life every single day because Daniel Bryan's WWE contract reportedly expired last week or was set to expire last week. Now, as we've noted here on the channel, Daniel Bryan lost the big career versus title main event match on SmackDown last week for the Universal Championship against Roman Reigns, and per the stipulation of the match, he is now banned from Friday Night SmackDown on Fox. Daniel Bryan's profile, we covered this, was recently moved and quickly moved to the alumni section of the WWE.com website. Now, in an update though, because a lot of people were questioning it, is this a work? Is this reality? Is Daniel Bryan a free agent? Is his contract going to expire? Is he going to come back? Is he going to go to Monday Night Raw? Is he going to go to NXT? What is going on with Daniel Bryan? What is going on with his contract? Obviously, Daniel Bryan's been talking a lot about his contract over the course of the last few months, talking about wanting to become a part-time superstar, wanting to spend more time with his family, all that kind of stuff. Well, we have an update. Now, in an update, Fightful Select, which is Fightful's Patreon service, be sure to check that out. They do a really good job with a lot of interesting and exclusive information, so be sure to subscribe to their service. Fightful Select, they are reporting that multiple sources in and outside of WWE have indicated that Bryan's WWE contract either expired last week or was indeed set to expire last week following the loss to Roman Reigns. Now, high-level sources noted that they had heard of the contract expiring, but that Daniel Bryan had not spoken openly about his contract status, at least they were aware of. Now, there's been no talk. There's also been no talk of any particular farewells backstage at SmackDown, as if Bryan wasn't going to be around moving forward. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean all of that much, as these farewells sometimes can happen privately or sometimes they can happen way after the fact. I don't know. Now, it should be noted that all of this information about Daniel Bryan's contract expiring and him not saying farewells and all that kind of stuff on SmackDown this past week, it doesn't mean that Daniel Bryan is leaving WWE or hasn't re-signed since last week or that he won't work for WWE without being under contract. Daniel Bryan has reportedly been vocal about doing some unconventional work with WWE and for WWE, and he's talked about this quite openly in recent interviews. The only thing that was confirmed at this point by Fightful is that multiple people within WWE had heard that Daniel Bryan's deal was expiring last week. Now, Bryan, as I mentioned, he's spoken to the media about his future and possibly transitioning into a part-time talent for a few months in recent media interviews. We covered this interview again previously, but I want to cover it again because I think it's important and I think it adds a good layer of context to really what's going on right now when it comes to Daniel Bryan. So he spoke recently with TV Line right before the match with Roman Reigns on SmackDown this past week and responded to reports that said his contract was expiring later this year, specifically in September. That was the date or the month that a lot of people were saying that his contract was going to expire. And this is what Daniel Bryan had to say at the time. He said, quote, "It's funny that people gravitate towards the date September, and I think it's because that's when my last contract ended, but it doesn't end in September. I'm still trying to figure out what that looks like." Now, he carried on in the interview and spoke openly about his future. He said, quote, "I had a tag team match on SmackDown recently, and that was a lot of fun, but my neck was just wrecked. I'm going to be 40 in May, and my daughter likes to get on my shoulders to pick leaves from a Japanese maple in front of our house. You get to that point where it's like, how long can I do this full time and still be able to do those kind of things with my daughter? What's the right balance between part-time and that sort of thing? It may be that it's just once every while when the urge strikes, or maybe like a schedule where it's 8 months on, these months off." One of the coolest thing about wrestling and just being an independent contractor in general is that you can say, well, I only really want to do this amount of work. What that amount of work is, I have no idea yet. I'm still trying to figure it out. But I also need to be respectful of the people who are relying on me to go to work. I have to give them an answer sooner rather than later. I'm trying to figure that out, trying to be responsible as an employee of somebody who's taken care of our family very well, but then also trying to take the time to figure it out. So that's the latest when it comes to Daniel Bryan. I say that's the latest, like, oh, it's nothing. It's a massive deal. It's a massive deal that Daniel Bryan's contract was set to expire this past Friday on SmackDown, or it has expired, and technically, as of right now, Daniel Bryan is a free agent. Now, I did a tweet today, and it was kind of tongue-in-cheek, to be honest. I didn't really mean it seriously, but you never know. That said, look, Daniel Bryan's a free agent right now, and there's a difference between being released by WWE and having that 90-day non-compete clause, and then having your contract expire and be a free agent. Technically, Daniel Bryan could go anywhere he wants right now. He could show up in any company, whether that's Impact Wrestling, Ring of Honor, New Japan Pro Wrestling, or AEW. And this is kind of what my tweet was kind of tongue-in-cheek speaking about earlier, is that, of course, tonight AEW presents Blood and Guts on TNT. It's a special edition of Dynamite. Obviously, it's a massive show. They've got the Blood and Guts main event between the Inner Circle and the Pinnacle. But on top of that as well, you've got a crowd in attendance tonight. It's going to be AEW's largest crowd since the beginning of the pandemic. There's rumors there could be a capacity of up to 50% in Daly's place tonight for Blood and Guts. If that's the case, it's a really big show. Not only is it a big show because obviously you've got the main event and it's a special edition of Dynamite, but you've also got a real significant crowd there in Daly's place as well. And technically, Daniel Bryan, if he wanted to, he could show up tonight on Dynamite for Blood and Guts on TNT. To be honest, I would be absolutely floored and I would be absolutely stunned if that's the case. I did the tweet earlier. It was tongue-in-cheek because I don't see that happening. I really don't see that happening. I just don't think Daniel Bryan's not the guy to pull a Lex Luger or to pull a Rick Rude or, that kind of thing of, right, my contract expires here. Jeff Jarrett. I listened to the My World podcast this week. It's very, very good. Be sure to check it out. And obviously, he dropped the title to China on the Sunday, and then the following night on Nitro, he's part of the WCW roster, and he's attacking Buff Bagwell. I don't see a similar situation with Daniel Bryan tonight. I really don't. That's not to say it won't happen. That's not because anything can happen in the world of pro wrestling. I just think Daniel Bryan, he's a very loyal guy. He's a very loyal guy, and he's loyal to WWE. Does that mean he'll stay with WWE? No, it doesn't. I just think him having his contract expire on the Friday and in the manner that his contract has expired, it's not as if Daniel Bryan, his contract expired because he was facing off mid-card talent or whatever. His contract expired. He put over the hottest act on the WWE roster right now, the biggest star on the WWE roster right now in Roman Reigns, the top heel in the WWE, just the biggest everything. That's what Roman Reigns is. So Daniel Bryan put this guy over strong at WrestleMania and on SmackDown. Daniel Bryan's red hot at the moment. Even though he put over the top act in the company, he's still red hot right now. He's very, very popular. And again, I don't know if he really would use that momentum against the WWE and come into AEW even hotter. You know what I mean? I just don't think he would do that. Now, sometimes, obviously, when people's contracts expiring, WWE tends to actually book them sometimes in a more favorable position, especially when they're higher up on the card. Daniel Bryan, CM Punk, that kind of stuff, because they want them to stay. They want to convince them to stay. But Daniel Bryan's position in terms of him wanting to stay with WWE or wanting to re-sign with WWE or anything like that, that doesn't really have anything to do with his status on the card. It doesn't have anything to do with, is Daniel Bryan getting a push or not? Is he going to be the world champion or all that kind of stuff? I really don't think Daniel Bryan cares that much about that. It's very obvious what Daniel Bryan cares about. And it's not even necessarily about money, I don't think. It's about the schedule. That's obviously what it's about with Daniel Bryan right now. I don't think Daniel Bryan wants to retire. I don't think we've seen Daniel Bryan wrestle his last match ever. Have we seen him wrestle his last match for WWE? I don't know. I don't know. I think it would be incredibly naive for me to say, yes, he's never going to wrestle for WWE again, because I just don't know if I necessarily see that. Have we seen him wrestle his last match for WWE for a while? Possibly. Absolutely, possibly. And I think Daniel Bryan, when he does all of these interviews and he does all of this media stuff, Daniel Bryan's a very honest interview. And that's what's great. Whenever Daniel Bryan does press or anything like that, he doesn't tend to hide much. He doesn't talk cryptically, or he doesn't hide anything. He's very open. And Daniel Bryan's been very open about his WWE status and what he wants for the remainder of his career. This hasn't just been going on the last couple of weeks. This has been going on since... Well, when did Daniel Bryan return to WWE television? Was it around October time last year or something like that? He had a bit of a hiatus, then he came back. And when he came back, some of the first things he was saying in any interviews, whether that was with independent press, or whether that was on Talking Smack or anything, he was saying, this is my last time as a full-time superstar. This is my last run as a full-time superstar. That doesn't mean I'm retiring. That doesn't mean I'm going to wrestle my last match or anything like that. It just means something's going to change. Something's going to change. And he knew that his contract was expiring in May, at the start of May. He knew that was going to happen. and he's been trying to figure out what's next. I think he probably wants to stay with WWE. As I mentioned earlier on, I think he's got a loyalty to WWE and Vince McMahon. They've been very good to him, and also they've been very good to his family in terms of, obviously, his wife, Brie Bella, and their 2 children. Obviously, Brie has all of her stuff still with WWE too, with the Total Bellas and all that kind of stuff, but also the Brie Bella and Daniel Bryan, they've got a lot of stuff independent of WWE as well, so not exactly stuck to them or any sense of the imagination like that. I think Daniel Bryan is just, like I said, in the interviews he's done, I think he's being very honest. I think he's just trying to figure out, what do I want next? The overarching theme of what he doesn't want is he doesn't want to be a full-time superstar anymore. And that's not just because of his status, as I mentioned, on the roster. That's because of his history, his career at this point. And I know, as I mentioned before, I know some people will roll their eyes when they hear, the guy's 40 and he doesn't want to be a full-time wrestler anymore. It's miles on the clock. Everyone's got a bump limit. Everyone has got a bump limit in the world of pro wrestling. Kevin Nash has said that before, that everyone's got their bump limit, and it's just a case of knowing how much you've got left. And Daniel Bryan's history throughout his career, not just in WWE, but in Ring of Honor and on the independent scene, this is a guy that worked a really, really physical style, and it caught up to him very, very quickly. The style was so physical and so demanding for all of those years that by the time he was in his mid-30s, when the time he was 33, 34, 35, he had to retire. Or there was a real concern about his health, not just before the concussions as well. There was a real concern about his health when he had that first neck injury just after he had won the World Heavyweight Championship in 2014 at WrestleMania. Obviously, his run was pretty much non-existent. I think he defended it against Kane, and that was it. Then it had the months of injuries, surgeries, and eventually he had to vacate it. And there was the concern about his neck at the time, that he couldn't get the feeling back in his arm or couldn't get the grip strength back in his arm. All that kind of stuff was a massive concern for him. So that was an issue. Eventually he comes back, and then he has the concussions, and he'd had numerous concussions in his career anyway. He was having concussion-related seizures. This is a guy that does have a lot of miles on the clock. And I think he realizes that, and he realizes, look, I was very fortunate to come back and be cleared once again to compete inside of a WWE ring because of my concussions. Myself, personally, I think the only reason he got cleared is because he told WWE, I'm going to work. So once my contract expires, it's either you clear me or someone else will, because I'm going to work somewhere else. And WWE looked at that and went, there's a lot of money on the table there. We can't afford to leave that. Suddenly, Daniel Bryan gets cleared. I think that's really the reality of what happened there. But Daniel Bryan, he's no fool. He realizes that if I want to carry on doing this, which he does, because pro wrestling's his passion, that's why he fought so hard to be able to get cleared again and to be able to return. He wants to carry on doing this, but he realizes, look, I've got to be smarter. I can't do this full time anymore physically, and just I want to spend time with my family. And he's a businessman as well. He mentioned this. He's an independent contractor. As bad as that may be, certain cases when it comes to WWE, he realizes he's an independent contractor. And when are you at your most powerful as an independent contractor? When your contract's expired. When your contract's coming up or it's expired. Look at some of the best negotiators in WWE history. One of the best is Brock Lesnar. And why does he sign those short-term deals? And why does he let his contract expire? Because he knows that's when he's valuable. Because then he can go to Vince McMahon or he can go to WWE or whoever he negotiates with and says, look, I don't care. I'll leave. I'll go somewhere else or I'll make my money. And he realizes that if you've got the opportunity to continuously negotiate and then you know your true value, you can find out your true value. And Daniel Bryan knows that. He realizes, look, this is a really important time. I'm 40 years old. My contract is expiring now and I have to make a decision. What do I want to do? What do I want to get out of the next few years of my career and the next few years of my life? Because this is probably, in terms of a big contract, this might be the last big contract he signs with the pro wrestling company before he does decide to retire. And he's got to realize, what do I want out of it? I don't want to be full-time. I still want to wrestle. And obviously I want to get financially compensated for being one of the best wrestlers on the planet. And he realizes that he's finally in a position of power now. And he can really, truly get what he wants and what he deserves out of all of this. So again, I don't think Daniel Bryan's as calculated as someone like Brock Lesnar. I don't think it's about the money. Obviously, it's a factor, but I don't think that's really the big be-all and end-all of the Daniel Bryan decision. And I think in a perfect world and a perfect scenario, Daniel Bryan would want to re-sign with WWE, work a part-time schedule. And I don't mean part-time schedule like Brock Lesnar or Goldberg, where they only work a select number of matches a year. I think his idea of a part-time schedule is It depends. I mean, he said it in the interview. I don't know if Daniel Bryan, in all good faith and conscience, would want to do a situation where he only works the 4 big pay-per-views a year. I can't necessarily see Daniel Bryan. Again, he's all about integrity, and he's all about the younger talent. He's put over a lot of younger talent in this last run. I can't see Daniel Bryan wanting to come in and take a spot. I just don't think that would sit well with him. So I think his version of a part-time deal, as I mentioned before, is the Undertaker Shawn Michaels part-time deal in the mid-2000s. When they would come back around SummerSlam, they would work the summer and the fall and the winter, all the way to the spring to WrestleMania season. They would have their WrestleMania match, and then they would be off of television for maybe 3 or 4 months until SummerSlam. Then they would come back, and that would be the schedule every year. And I think Daniel Bryan would look at that and say, you know what, that's feasible. Obviously, when live events return and stuff as well, he probably wouldn't work the majority of them. Maybe works a European tour or a European date here and there to sell some tickets and all that kind of stuff. Maybe that's the deal he wants. And I think if he got offered that, he would probably take it. Because I do think his priority and his want is to probably stay with WWE. That's probably the most likely thing that he wants. And maybe he'll get that. I don't know. But he has spoken and he has been open about wanting to work in other places as well, particularly facing opponents that he hasn't faced before. Of course, he's mentioned Kenny Omega, and he's mentioned some names in New Japan as well. And obviously, he would be interested in exploring that. I mean, if he wanted a part-time schedule, he would get one with AEW because he would have to work once a week. Now, I know people will say, well, he works once a week at the moment with WWE. That's true. That is true. But I think with AEW, he would be able to call his shots a bit more. And it would be a case of maybe he just has to travel to Jacksonville or whatever. And he cuts a promo. And I'm not saying he's Sting or anything like that, where he's only going to work pay-per-views or whatever. But he could call his shots much, much better. And I think he would have that greater degree of flexibility with AEW. Obviously, as well, when it comes to AEW, there are a plethora of opponents he hasn't faced off before. Kenny Omega is up there. People like Darby Allin. Those names are obviously very exciting to him. And again, there are other names on the roster as well, and they've got the connections with Impact Wrestling and New Japan and that kind of stuff. So who's to say that he doesn't look at that? And I'm sure that Tony Khan, of course, they can make him a very generous offer. And I don't know if Tony Khan or any other company has reached out for that matter, or people within AEW, someone like Chris Jericho has reached out. I don't know. I really don't know how that would work, but that's an option. Of course, it's an option. And again, if he's looking for a reduced schedule, AEW will offer him that. And I know at the moment, again, people might say, well, the schedule for WWE right now is very similar to AEW. That is true, but we are getting to a point where things are starting to open up a little bit in the United States and around the world in most places. And hopefully by the end of the year, I probably look at a situation where the discussions about going back on the road and the discussions about touring are starting to come up again. And again, that's why it's important why Daniel Bryan has to make a decision relatively quickly, because he realizes that things are going to change in WWE relatively soon. So he needs to, if he wants to get what he wants, he needs to do it now. So that's another factor as well. So if you had to put me on the spot right now and say, what is he going to do? I would say he probably re-signs with WWE and he figures out some kind of deal, a different kind of deal. We've seen at this point, I think Edge is a great example of this, that if WWE is really backed up against the wall and they see AEW as a real true alternative and AEW as a really interested in a talent, at the end of the day, Vince McMahon will cough up the dough. That's kind of what he's done. I think Edge is a great example of that. Remember, Edge got the offer from AEW first, and he said, "No, you've got to go. You've got to stay with us." And it was kind of the same with AJ Styles and the Good Brothers. And I know that was pre-COVID. But I think Daniel Bryan's a special exception here. And I think Vince McMahon and the powers that be in WWE would realize we need to keep Daniel Bryan around. We can't afford someone as talented as a Daniel Bryan to go to AEW. I know people will say, well, what about Paul White? What about Christian? They slipped through the cracks. I don't think the Big Show did. I think Vince McMahon looked at that and said, I think we've got the majority of our worth out there. I don't know if that's the right decision or not. Only time will tell. I think Christian probably just felt that there were better opportunities for him in AEW and a better position for him to rise up the card and really make the most out of this final run. I don't think that's the case with Daniel Bryan. You know, Daniel Bryan just main evented WrestleMania. That wasn't going to happen with Christian. It just wasn't. So Daniel Bryan's on a different plateau there. It's a really interesting one. It's a fascinating one. And of course, obviously there are other companies. Daniel Bryan's got history in Ring of Honor. Could he come back there? I don't know. For one match, who knows? Obviously, Impact Wrestling and especially stuff in Japan. I don't know how much Daniel Bryan would want to travel to Japan. That's an interesting dynamic as well. So this is a really fluid situation. It's a fascinating situation as well. It's something that isn't going to go away anytime soon unless Daniel Bryan does re-sign with WWE or something like that. Again, if you put me on the spot now, I would say he sticks around with WWE because I think that's where his loyalty is. And I think ultimately when Vince McMahon and WWE, when their back's up against the wall, I think they'll probably cough up and meet Daniel Bryan's demands, whatever they may be. But it's certainly a fascinating situation, and who knows? Who knows? Maybe he could show up tonight on Dynamite. I would be floored. I would be absolutely floored, but anything's possible, and it would certainly be a massive, massive event to make his debut. And God, could you imagine the reaction? Could you imagine the reaction? It would be huge. It'd be absolutely massive. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on Daniel Bryan's WWE contract officially expiring, making Daniel Bryan currently a free agent? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community, drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. It really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak with you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.